During my daughter's freshman year of high school, she informed me that she needed to get copies of Brave New World in 1984 because they were studying dystopian futures. I said, "Why? You're living in one." And chuckles were had all around, and we went back to whatever we were binge watching on Netflix at the time. Just a little over a year later, and I'm not laughing so much anymore. We've seen the power and scope of the IRS grow so much that it's the heavy for both Obamacare enforcement and the shutting down of political opponents of the administration. The U.S. Patent Office was just used to run an end-around procedure and kneecap a business to bow to political correctness. Unelected regulators at the EPA are trying to kill an entire industry and all of the jobs it creates. The federal behemoth is growing, and it is all because the Democrats are firmly in the grip of the extreme left fringe of the party. But do the mom-and-pop Democrats in flyover country know about this? It's a question I asked in a piece I wrote for the Daily Caller last week, and now I'm going to use my words and ask it out loud. Hi, kids. I'm Stephen Cruiser, filling in here on Trifecta for the delightfully quirky Stephen Green. Joining me today is the equally delightful and quirky Bill Whittle and our recently relocated friend, Scott Ott. Gentlemen, all of us have logged a considerable amount of time living in the bluer areas of the country and surrounded by Democrats. They're everywhere. In my experience, even here in Los Angeles, they're not all totalitarian progressive lunatics like Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, or the current Chief Executive Officer of the United States. Bill, I'll go to you first. The Patent Office actions coupled with the use of the IRS as an attack dog against Tea Party groups creates a dangerous precedent for the use of indirect end-around federal force, which is a bit easier to get away with for a while. Do you think Joe and Mary Democrat in Dinkiesburg, Ohio realize at all how heavy-handed this is, or are they all well aware of it and merely think the end justifies the means?
I think there's a general malaise, Steve, rather that the country is just not the country anymore. It's every administration towards the end, people start feeling the country's off track. But I think for the first time ever, people are feeling not just this business of our kids may not do better than us, but there's something fundamentally going wrong in America. I'm so glad you mentioned Brave New World, and especially 1984. You know, the big reveal in 1984, the giant, shocking reveal, is when we find out that everything that the really not much of a hero, but Winston Smith, all of his anti-government thoughts had been recorded by the fact that there was a camera hidden in his television screen. And this was shocking when we realized that the government had been watching everything that he's done and said. Well, we all have cameras in our television screens at home now. Most of us have 2 or 3. I got one right here. I got a camera in the television screen right here, and everywhere I go, this camera is with me, and if somebody wanted to, they could turn it on. So I think of all the things that we're seeing out there, Steve, the one thing that is really destructive of the entire idea of America is not a weaponized IRS or any of these other regulations. All of these are appalling, and all of these are causing us enormous headaches. But if it becomes common knowledge, it already is, to answer your question, already common knowledge, that the government is watching everything you do, listening to every cell phone conversation you make, monitoring every text and email, then that is the end of America. And for those who would say, well, we have to do this in order to prevent terrorism, I understand the consequences of what I'm saying here. But a nuclear weapon detonated in Times Square would be a catastrophe, but it wouldn't be the end of America. Americans thinking that they can no longer say what's on their mind anymore without the IRS picking up their phone calls or chats or text and then handing it over to the weaponized IRS, that is the end of America.
Yeah, it's the speech and thought police who scare me more than anything else right now. Scott Ott, I've got a two-parter for you. First, even in this era where the MSM doesn't hold the power that it used to, how is it that they've gotten away with portraying the Republicans as being ruled by the fringe when it's the Democrats who have been hijacked? Second, is this hijacking permanent, or can it be corrected once the three-headed Pelosi-Reid-Obama monster is electorally deposed?
I think each party tries to do the same thing to the other party, especially during election seasons. We always try to find ways to associate our opponent with the most extreme version of somebody who identifies with their party, so that the average voter, this mom and pop that you're discussing, will look at that and go, hey, wait a minute, that ain't Jack Kennedy's Democrat Party, you know, and they'll get uncomfortable with that. You know, on the basic thesis here, I don't think that the average Democrat is like Nancy Pelosi. Unfortunately, I also don't think that they're tuned in to even know who Nancy Pelosi is or what she believes. And at some point, somebody's got to be held accountable for the behavior of the party that you say you identify with. I think Republicans would be much smarter if they stop attacking Democrats, if they stop attacking the icons of the Democrat Party, and start trying to communicate in ways that make sense to average Americans. Because every time you say something nasty about Nancy Pelosi, you say something nasty not about the Democrat voter, but about his grandpa, which is the reason why he's a Democrat now, because his grandpa was.
That was beautiful, Scott, because it kind of leads into my conclusion. Thank you very much. I truly believe that the majority of the people who vote Democrat or profess to be liberal do so out of habit and little else. Those of us who spend this much time involved in politics tend to forget that the average American isn't given to a lot of introspection on the subject, until it hits very close to home, that is, like Obamacare canceled policies or the hikes in premiums did. I think most Democrats outside of the larger liberal cities in America would be horrified if they knew how unhinged the progressives are willing to be in their zeal to stifle dissent. The remnant hippie psychos from the 1960s have gotten into positions of power, and they are desperate to portray those of us who disagree with them as murderous racists just to keep their voters from engaging us. Why? If they do, we might be able to tell them that their banner carriers would gladly use the federal power to crush them too. There's a tale of two governments in most Democrats' heads right now. There's a government on one hand that is a force for good and helps people and is nice to the children and helps the downtrodden. Then there is the NSA, which scares them all. Many of the people who love Obamacare were mortified by the revelations about the NSA surveillance. They don't grasp that it's all the same government. Maybe the key to getting the country back on track is getting some of these people to see the government as the soulless, heartless, self-perpetuating monster it is. I find it helpful to not talk about, like Scott said, the Democrats or this or that, or even the government, because that's taken on a kind connotation. I find it easier to talk about the bureaucracy, because everybody hates bureaucracy. But if you meet someone in a seemingly normal job who doesn't hate bureaucracy, they're NSA, for sure. Thanks to Bill and Scott for letting me fill in this week. For everyone here at PJTV, I'm Stephen Cruiser.